Hi everyone. This is going to be a short video going over the parts of a sonata form as laid out by Hepokoski and Darcy's Elements of Sonata Form. And we're going to look at a little case study of Mozart's piano sonata in G major, K.283, just the first movement. So you can find a PDF for that on the class Moodle site, or you can find a PDF linked in the description below. So you'll recall the primary parts of the sonata form are the exposition, the development, which we won't talk about in this video, and the recapitulation. So, we begin in the exposition with the primary theme, signified by P. The primary theme's job is really to establish the key of the piece, to securely point us towards the tonic. It lays out the first theme. It sort of tells us where the piece is going to go. Next, we have an element called the transition. The transition is often the place at which we begin to pull away from the primary key. Remember, the primary key has the task of setting up a strong, perfect, authentic cadence in the home key. The transition is going to pull us away from there towards the secondary key, frequently 5 in major or 3 in a minor key sonata. Transition is also responsible for sort of energy gain. As it pulls us away from the tonic, it also frequently becomes faster, louder, a little bit more energetic, usually becomes a little bit repetitive, all in the service of bringing us upwards to the S theme, the secondary theme. Just before the secondary theme kicks off, though, there will very frequently be this little break. I've drawn a little breath mark there, or MC for Medial Caesura. So the Medial Caesura is a break at the end of this energy-gaining transition theme that kind of lets us catch our breath before the secondary theme kicks off. The secondary theme is in a new key. It often has a contrasting texture. Generally it's a little bit smoother, more legato, a little more lyrical. That's certainly the case in the piece that we're going to see right now. So the Medial Caesura is often a literal break. You'll see a quarter rest, a half rest, sometimes most of a measure when you maybe land on a downbeat and then have 3 beats of rest. Or it might be more of a figurative, metaphorical break where the chord lands, the harmonic movement or the melodic movement is kind of stopped, but we're still filled in with maybe some kind of generic scale figure or a held tone or a repeated tone. This is called Caesura Fill. So after that brief caesura, the secondary theme kicks off, and the secondary theme has the task of bringing us to a PAC in the secondary key. It's really trying to establish that the piece has modulated securely. So that endpoint, the endpoint for the secondary theme, is called the EEC, or the essential expositional closure. So the EEC, as we'll talk about during the piece, the EEC is going to be the first perfect authentic cadence that is followed by new music. That is, that's not followed by a repetition of what just came before it. It has to be followed by something we haven't heard yet. Finally, after the EEC, you're going to see a little bit of closing space, depending on the composer, the time period of the sonata form. This might be very brief, or it might be a little bit longer. So those are the basic parts of the exposition. I did not include, since it's not in this piece, the slow introduction, which sometimes can happen before the beginning, quote-unquote, of a sonata form. It often is not repeated. It often does not become part of the form. Haydn uses these a lot, and if you remember, that was what was notable about Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, that the introductory material wound up coming back over and over again throughout the piece. Development we won't talk about a lot. We've done other lessons on that, but it's a moment where a lot of the themes will be brought back in new keys. You know, things you heard in major might come back in minor. Things are less stable. They're rapidly modulating. They're often using techniques such as sequences to really keep things moving. And the task of the development is eventually to bring about this retransition where our secondary key, if it was 5, assuming it was 5, moves from being the tonicized key, that was what we called the 5 sub T, to an active dominant. And that active dominant is going to take us back to the recapitulation. So the recap uses the same components as the exposition, often in the same order, you know, almost always without too much alteration, although things will be rewritten. This is what they call the rotational principle, the fact that all of the same themes come back in the same order. So the primary theme is going to move again through the transition. This time, however, I'm going to draw a horizontal arrow because the transition in the recap is not going to modulate. Or even if they reuse some of the same music, the end result is not going to be a modulation. We'll see in this case how a similar transition can allow the piece to modulate or not modulate. Oftentimes in the primary theme group or the transition, you'll find a moment that Hepokoski and Darcy call the crux. In my own analyses, I frequently put a star there. And the crux is a very important moment. It's when the recapitulation stops corresponding directly to the exposition. Usually you can find what they call correspondence measures, and this is where you can literally map, you know, first measure of the primary theme is exactly the same as the exposition was, second measure, third measure, you know, second phrase, and so on. Sometimes this only goes a little ways into the primary theme. Sometimes this goes all the way until well into the transition. Or if you have something called a bifocal close, then the primary and the transitional themes will end up being exactly the same. Bifocal close really briefly is when you write the piece so that you end on a half cadence in the tonic. You know, you end on 5 as a half cadence, and that allows you either to take your break and then simply start in the key of 5 and go on as if normal, or it allows you to take your brief little breath and then go back to 1 as if it were a half cadence and you are starting over like an interruption. So here's our MC. Secondary theme comes in. Secondary theme will have been transposed down. A lot of times you can actually literally hear this. It has a different character from happening normally a fifth lower in a major key. A lot of times you can tell that this has been done differently. In a minor key, this is a lot of times a moment of decision for the composer, because after their minor key tonic, they're going to have a major 3 theme in the exposition, and they're going to have to bring that down to tonic level, but then they're left with their minor mode sonata ends in major. That happens a lot. Or sometimes they might choose to rewrite the theme or to do some other kind of unexpected thing so that their movement can end up ending in minor. Secondary theme pushes towards an equivalent moment for the whole piece, which we call the ESC. That's the essential structural closure. That's oftentimes the very same perfect authentic cadence that we heard for the EEC, except that the essential structural closure is really what closes off the tonal motion of the entire piece. Everything that was set into motion by the primary theme and its modulation, everything throughout the development, it was all pointing up to this point, the ESC. Then again, we'll frequently have some closing material that we hear for a little while after that moment until the movement comes to a close. So, with that being said, we're going to listen to a recording of Mozart's K.283 first movement, this G major piano sonata, and this will give us some things to work with in order to show all the parts of the sonata form in action. So go ahead and grab the PDF or maybe a printout of the score, or simply follow along on the video. So, now that we've heard this, let's go through the themes in the exposition. So there's no slow introduction in this piece. We're going to be right on the primary theme, right from the outset. So remember, we're in G major. We're going to start on a 1 chord. So this theme unfolds as sort of an expanded sentence. We go through the basic idea, the restatement of the basic idea, a little fragmentation section. We have a sort of expanded continuation to cadence. Then we're going to repeat that second half with fragmentation again, and the moment that takes us to the cadence. So both here from measure 9 to 10, and here measure 15 to 16, these are both going to be 5 to 1, presented as a cadential 6/4 to 7/5/3, and landing on 1. So here's our nice, secure, perfect authentic cadence. As you remember, the rhetorical tonal goal of the primary theme is that it needs to bring about a strong, secure cadence to really establish the primary key of the sonata and really show us where we're starting so that it can become significant when we arrive there again in the recapitulation. So in Hepokoski and Darcy parlance, this is a 1 PAC, a perfect authentic cadence in the home key. So next, we'll begin the transitional theme from here. Remember, the transition is designed to set up the secondary theme. That means it either modulates to the secondary key or it prepares us to modulate to the secondary key. It's also a moment where the sonata will tend to pick up energy. So we hear that in the sort of accelerating figures. We hear this accelerating, energy-gaining figure. And that's going to take us up to D right here. It's walking in this scalar figure. C sharp, of course, is scale degree sharp 4. In the home key of G, we know that that's always significant. We're always watching for 4 to turn into sharp 4, and for that note to lead us up to 5. In this case, it doesn't land on 5 so much as it kind of goes up there and stops. So I'm going to call this a half cadence, a 1, HC. So even though we're landing on a 5 chord, if we think of this as being in the original home key, all of this is to some degree in G major, or is related back to G major. We're going to call this a 1 HC because D is a half cadence in the home key of G. Now this will become significant later. The way that your transition ends kind of sets up what has to happen in the recapitulation. So in this case, Mozart goes all the way right up to a half cadence in D. Then essentially he decides he's just going to land, or just going to begin in D from there. So this is our secondary theme. If we kind of look at the way that this is treated, we're suddenly in D for the moment with a 1/6 chord that passes down here to a root position chord and then continues on. You see the, C sharp, which is the leading tone in the secondary key, and so forth. This figure gets repeated a couple of times. Right, sorry, one other thing to point out about this moment is that right here is our Medial Caesura. The MC, as you remember, is this moment of silence, or a sort of rhetorical break, or sometimes a literal break, as in this case, since we have these quarter rests here. It's a moment of silence that allows us to kind of gather ourselves after the energy gain of the transition, and it prepares the entrance of the secondary theme, which is usually sort of contrasting in character. You'll see here the secondary theme is kind of on the offbeats. It's much more legato than the primary theme was. So we're going to go all the way through here. As we go through the secondary theme, you can feel free to go back and listen to it again. We're going to arrive at sort of two candidate moments where we might say the secondary theme has arrived at a PAC in the key of D, the secondary key. Just like the first theme, it sort of involves this repetition of music. So the first thing you're going to come to is right through here in measure 34, 35, 36, up to measure 37. You notice we've gone into treble clef, and so we have A here spelling out a D major chord in 6-4 position, kind of goes up to pick up the 7-5-3 position, and then it lands down here on D. But because this involves a repetition, we're not going to call this the final cadence of the secondary theme. So if you remember, the secondary theme is tasked with bringing us to a strong, perfect, authentic cadence in the secondary key. But that secondary cadence, the essential expositional closure, the EEC, is going to be the first PAC that is followed by new music. In other words, if you have a repetition, which we do here, this whole chunk right after here repeats what we just heard from the end of 33 on through the first cadence. So although this is a PAC in D, it can't be the EEC. It can't actually close off the secondary theme because it has a repetition. So what we're actually going to find is down here, measure 42, we've got the same figure. 5, 6, 4, goes to 7, 5, 3, and that lands on 1 in D. In our global sense, we can think of this being a 5 PAC, in the sense that if we want to relate our keys back to the original tonality of G major, this is a 5 PAC, but locally it's a tonic since we've modulated to D. So this is going to be a 5 PAC, E, E, C. It's going to be sort of its full abbreviation. So measure 43 is this moment where the tonal goal of the exposition has been achieved. This is the upward arrow in the Hepokoski and Darcy diagram from their first chapter. From here we have a little bit of closing material, I would say, that's kind of going to emphasize D a little bit more. We get these little fluid melodies that are a reference back to the first theme, but not exactly reproducing it. And then we have bum, 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 bum. We get this little repeated cadential figure, bum, 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 emphasizing, again, D major. So then repetition. We're going to go back and hear the exposition again. Sorry, that's the repetition right in the middle of measure 53, second beat. We'll return to the beginning and hear the exposition again. Since this is just a quick demo, we won't worry too much about what we hear in the development. Instead, we're going to go ahead and go back, go to the recapitulation. So we're going to find that the recapitulation ends up happening right here, right in the last little bit of the third page. There is the beginning of your primary theme again. Dun 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 dun. We'll see that continue on. Right onto the fourth page. So dun 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 dun. So I'm just going to mark this so that we're absolutely clear. It's really starting in end of measure 71, the pickup to 72. But here's where we're in G major again, back to 1 for our primary theme. Recap, just to be absolutely clear. So, you'll remember that I talked about the significance of the half cadence at the medial caesura, the end of the transitional section. And so this is sort of significant because, in theory, if you have a half cadence, in this case, a half cadence that lands on D, you can simply go and start on G for the secondary theme, and you don't have to rewrite anything. You can go through the primary theme exactly as it was. You can go right up here to the transition. Don't have to change it. You don't have to change the cadence that you end on. But what you'll see is that Mozart actually does choose to change this. Right here, I'm going to put a little star. This moment is what we call the crux. And this is the moment where the recapitulation ceases to correspond to exactly what we got in the exposition, and it ends up being recomposed in order to bring about the return of the secondary theme in the tonic. This is a slightly weird case, though, because Mozart didn't actually need to do that. And indeed, if you look ahead, the transition is essentially the same. The transition's not recomposed. It goes all the way through here, lands through B, C sharp, D, gives us another medial caesura, another 1 H, C, and a break. And then it resolves as a half cadence. It begins again on 1. So none of the transition actually had to be changed. In fact, the primary theme didn't need to be changed either, but Mozart went ahead and changed it. He actually ends up shortening it by doing this. If you remember, it was the expanded sentence that then repeats the second half of the sentence. Mozart decides not to do that. He brings about the transition much sooner in this case. Although, if you look, he actually chose to end this on a 1-6 chord, making a little bit less final the end of the primary theme and the recap. So 1 HC brings about the secondary theme transposed to the tonic. And we're going to go all the way through here. We're going to be looking for the moment when the secondary theme ends, since here's the end of our movement right here at the beginning of page 5. And if we look through the secondary theme, we're going to find much the same thing as we found on the first page. So if we look down to measure 104, we've got this D as sort of cadential 6/4, 7/5/3 to 1, but then we have a repetition all the way through here. Now to the bottom of the page, measure 109, D in the bass with cadential 6/4 to 7/5/3 to 1. So that's the one that we're going to say is 5/6/4 to 7/5/3, landing on 1. And this is going to be the essential structural closure. So the ESC is the moment that brings the entire sonata form movement to a close. If the exposition was oriented towards achieving the EEC, the perfect authentic cadence in the secondary key, then the entire sonata form movement, anchored by the recapitulation, is concerned with going from the tonic through the secondary key, through the development, through the first and second themes again, and bringing about that ESC that closes off the entire sonata. It's sort of the triumphant arrival back in the home key, brought about by the secondary theme being transposed. So that's sort of the last big pillar of the sonata form.